in Baltimore. Meet up on the hassock here, watch some Orioles baseball, and maybe try to tear into the NHL and the NBA semifinals, even though the disappointment is palpable, certainly for Ted Leonsis and the Monumental family, as well as for me with the Caps and the Wizards both going down. This guy, though, he covers all things NBA. They just march on at Basketball Insiders. It'll be Celtics and it'll be Cavaliers this time around. Of course, Golden State and San Antonio already getting going. Steve Kyler is one of our defending champions. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Steve Kyler. That's Kyler NBA out on Twitter. Tens of thousands follow him, but you're not following these teams. You're like running around with the combine that's not the combine down in Florida, right?
Yeah, we're kind of shifting into full-on draft mode. Had the real combine in Chicago last week. Have the professional basketball combine, also known as the NIT of combines. It's going to take place at IMG Academy. So looking at tall guys trying to get into the draft.
Well, we'll get to Melo and to Jackson and to the Maryland thing in a minute for the draft part, because we're only a couple weeks out on the draft at this point, but also a couple of weeks out on crowning an NBA champion. You know, I don't mean to be crass about this. I'm a bigger hockey fan than a basketball fan. I think anybody that's listened to me knows that over the last 25 years. But the hockey thing's so wildly unpredictable with the Ottawas and the Pittsburghs and the Nashvilles and the Anaheims, where the NBA, if I don't know. Are there NBA round of 16 brackets? Because it would be the easiest bracket to ever fill out. You just go with the chalk, and usually that shows up for the NBA. And here we are. It's a chalk semifinals. That doesn't mean it's bad. Certainly, these should be the best teams, right?
Yeah, we had a little bit of a snoozer here. The opening round, the first round when you had all 16 teams. There were some competitive games. And it was fun. I mean, the Warriors made short order of Portland, and certainly the Cavs made short order of Indiana, but the rest of them were contested. I mean, you saw Chicago kind of take the Celtics to the wire. There was some fun stuff there. But, the best teams usually win out. It's pretty rare that you see an upset. And part of that is, the 7-game series. You saw more, combustibility when we played best of 5 for a little while in that opening series. But, best of 7, being able to beat an elite team 4 times, especially when 4 games are going to be played on their home floor, that's a tough thing to do. It's been done. I mean, we saw it that one year where the Believe Warriors team took down the first-place Dallas Mavericks team, but those are rarities. A lot of the NBA playoffs is about the journey, not the result. The best teams usually end up in the finals. And sometimes you'll see more, the conference finals where maybe a 2 will beat a 1 or a 3 will beat a 1. But it's pretty rare that you see the low seed teams get in there. But, this year, I think more than any, the regular season was interesting in the NBA. You saw the Boston Celtics get first place away from the Cleveland Cavaliers. You saw some teams do some fun things. And I joke with people, I went and saw the last Star Wars movie. I knew how it ended, but I still wanted to see that movie. And that's how the NBA has been lately, is you kind of know the ending, but you still like to watch the movie.
Do we know the ending, though? I mean, at this point, I don't know that we know the ending. I think everybody's thinking San Antonio can put up some relative fight, and they did in Game 1. The Boston-Cleveland thing, I don't think anybody thinks Boston's a legit number 1 seed. Certainly, they took it right to the end of the bone with the Wizards. And, in the aftermath of all of it, it really feels like a lost opportunity for the Wizards. This was a great chance for them.
It was. I think the Wizards would have matched up much better to the Cleveland Cavaliers than Boston. But this Boston team, they've been the uncharacteristic winner. They don't have a lot of named superstar guys. Isaiah Thomas has certainly become an all-star, but, the next guy down, Avery Bradley. If you follow basketball, you know who AB is. If you follow basketball, you know who Kelly Olynyk is. But, guy at the end of the bar doesn't. So, guy sitting on the sofa probably doesn't. So it's kind of a no-name team. But this team's on the rise. And I don't think the result of this year is anything more than a very young team's getting all the way there. And they're going to add another player likely in the draft. They're going to add another player in free agency. And their young guys are getting a lot of really good experience. But they're not much of a matchup for the Cleveland Cavaliers. It is going to be Warriors-Cavaliers in the end. And certainly with San Antonio losing Kawhi Leonard to the ankle, and it looks like, it's going to be multiple games on that one. it does look like we'll get a rematch. But I think that's a good thing, too. If you think about the glory years of the NBA, when the NBA emerged from tape delay at night, was around, the Lakers and the Celtics. The NBA was at its best when every year it was, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and everybody knew who those players were, and there were rivalries, and teams hated each other because you had to go through each other every year, and that's what it's become. The Cavs are, have 3-4 of the best players in the world. The Warriors have 4-5 of the best players in the world, and they're going to square off in the finals to get it all done. And I think sometimes we've had NBA Finals matchups where they were snoozers. I mean, you think some of those San Antonio when they swept the Cavs, that's not any fun. This is going to be a bloodbath with two teams that really don't like each other. And both teams are playing really good basketball. More importantly, both teams really well rested.
I guess the greater question for me, as a guy who's always on the periphery of the NBA and who loved those Bullets teams of the late 70s, and, it was must-seeing in the 80s, and, I was in NBA rotisserie leagues, owning Clyde Drexler in the 1980s, so, I loved basketball, but then there's this time of year where I watch hockey and I watch basketball, and there's action and it's more quiet, and there's one place where you have no idea how it's going to end up when the Penguins and the Capitals are getting together, and then you have this other league where the chalk kind of always holds up. I guess everyone sort of comes out like the cicada 2 weeks from now when it is Golden State and Cleveland, because it will become must-viewing type of thing. The world will stop, the sports world will stop the first week of June for that, but what can the NBA do in the aftermath of all of this to give other teams a real belief that if I'm a Wizards fan, or God forbid I'm a New Orleans fan, or I'm a Philadelphia 76ers fan or whatever, that my team is really going to get better at some point and challenge these teams? I think that's the most disappointing part of the NBA, is that in 20 places, baseball's like that this year. There's a lot of bad baseball teams, or baseball teams that seemingly have no chance, but the NBA sort of leads the world in that.
Well, we've seen a couple of things. The last collective bargaining agreement, the one that will expire in July, made it a little better for teams in terms of competitive balance. But this new one, where the fact that, the Kevin Durant situation where he should walk away and basically make exactly the same money in Golden State, that's going to go away, especially for these star-level players, guys who can make the All-NBA team, because there's going to be a huge financial windfall to stay with the team you're at and do it earlier so you can lock these guys in. You don't have to wait till the last year of their contract. So it's going to get better in that regards. But the truth of it is the Cleveland Cavaliers are here because they drafted well. They got a Kyrie Irving by way of taking on Baron Davis's contract from the Clippers. They drafted Tristan Thompson. They were bad enough to get the number 1 overall pick that became Andrew Wiggins that they could trade for Kevin Love. And because they amassed all of those really promising assets,
while hating on LeBron, by the way, while the owner's pooping on LeBron and he's winning championships in Miami, it really has kind of come full circle, right?
Because of all the things they had, and that was the thing is, they had things. They drafted well, and it became an attractive place. And you look at the Golden State Warriors. Golden State drafted Steph Curry. They drafted Klay Thompson. They drafted Draymond Green. They put that squad together, and an Andre Iguodala wanted to go there in free agency. A Kevin Durant was willing to go there in free agency. Kevin Durant wouldn't have thought about the Warriors 5 years ago. The Warriors were a laughingstock for a decade, but they did the draft well. And the key to this, and this is where the Wizards really are shining right now, John Wall was a draft pick. Bradley Beal was a draft pick. Otto Porter, Kelly Oubre. These are draft picks. And if you're patient with that core and you spend the money on that core and you're smart in free agency, then you're next in line. And for some of these teams, you just have to wait for the window. LeBron's not going to be bulletproof forever. The Warriors aren't going to be this team forever. In 2 or 3 years, the guard is going to change, and you want to have your guys in their prime, ready to go and experienced, so they can snatch it away. If you think about the Pistons were that team 2 straight years back to back before Michael Jordan snatched it away from them and put an end to that. And that's just how this goes in the NBA, especially when you're building dynasty-level teams. And the Warriors are set up to be that for a couple more years. The Cavs are set up for that now. The Wizards aren't that far away, neither are the Boston Celtics.
He is Steve Kyler. He covers all things NBA at Basketball Insiders. You can follow his journey on Twitter at Steve Kyler. That's Kyler NBA. And, of course, one of our defending champs here in watching this Final Four get together. Any postmortem on the Wizards? I mean, you talk about how well they've drafted. You talk about them putting the right coach in place. I think we can all, have seen that. I think there is palpable disappointment because that opportunity did sit there. But then you wonder, okay, how do they then get to the next level if it's not about waiting out LeBron? They couldn't even get to LeBron. They couldn't get it done when it was a tight game in the third quarter. They couldn't stop a kid in Game 7 that has now built a legend with the man bun, right?
And here's the part, and you're almost there, Nestor, admit it. They got to learn how to win on the road. They learned how to win at home and be dominant at home, but they became a very average team on the road. And, if you can't win games on the road, then you have to win home court. You've got to have Game 7 in your building. And so that's part of it. You can't give away games in November because 3 more games, and now you're talking about a totally different lineup. You've got to be able to win on the road. And this Wizards team, as much as they turned the corner, and if you think about who they were in November, they were dreadful.
Yeah.
They turned the corner and became dominant at home. They've got to figure out a way to take that on the road. And that's the maturation that needs to happen with a young team. And you think about it, this team is still really young. They've got more to learn and more to do. And they're going to get another offseason here where they can add one more veteran and maybe shore up that bench a little bit. Brandon Jennings was huge for them after the trade deadline. You get those guys in earlier, and those guys start to get that same swagger on the road that they have at home. The really good teams, the dominant teams, don't care where they play. The Wizards have to figure that out.
All right, so you got it Cleveland and Golden State, but you haven't really, picked a winner in this thing. From a trending standpoint, for where it stands right now, and whatever level of difficulty each team will go through. And I think a big part of Cleveland winning last year was the struggle that Golden State had all during this time last year with injuries, with Steph Curry, with having series linger longer. It feels very, very businesslike for both of these teams, and has from the beginning, that this thing could be dispatched very quickly this weekend, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot in this conference finals round. Again, with Kawhi Leonard banged up and not right, there went the window. Game 1 was probably the best chance for the Spurs to kind of knock the Warriors off, but they didn't, and they're probably not going to. The next part of this is, they're going to get to the finals. The interesting thing in this is I like the Cleveland Cavaliers in this matchup, just simply because I think the Spurs showed you the blueprint. You got to be able to play inside, play at the basket, challenge the fact that the Warriors don't have a rim defender, that they're not very big and physical. They want to play from the perimeter. The Cavs can shoot threes. The Cavs can score from outside. But you've got LeBron, and you've got Tristan Thompson, and you've got Kevin Love that all can play in the paint. And the fact that the Warriors just don't have an answer for that, that's how the Spurs ran it up in Game 1. I think that's how the Cavs can make this a real interesting series.
Well, when the Warriors shoot, you can't beat them. When they don't shoot, they make themselves very, very vulnerable, right, when they're missing shots.
And that was the thing in Game 1 with the Spurs was, they got back into that game not trying to do something superhero. It didn't take Steph Curry going for 50. It took them playing their game. Steph hit some shots. Kevin Durant hit some shots, and Steph hit some shots, and then Kevin hit some shots. And, they just played their game and got back into it. But I think the roadmap is there, that they're very beatable on the inside. And that's been what teams have done to them. The teams that have beaten the Warriors have done it because the Warriors don't rebound incredibly well. They don't defend the rim very well. So there's a window there. But, look, right now I'm going to tell you I'm going to take the Cavs. I think the Cavs get this thing done again, and LeBron will repeat. But it's going to be fun, and I don't think it gets decided in anything less than 6 games.
Steve, I'm going to take you into the political nature of what Popovich went through earlier this week. I happened to be at the Steve Kerr press conference the morning after the election back in November. I was out in Golden State for that game with the dude that saved my wife's life, and heard the statements. And I'm seeing what's going on with Colin Kaepernick in the NFL, and I'm opining on that. I saw what happened to Adam Jones in the outfield in Boston 2 weeks ago with the racism bait there. I would think the NBA, of all all the places where it has been a colorful, dominated league for all of my lifetime, that this wouldn't be so outlandish or stand on its own that Popovich would have a stance on this. And, throughout the whole Black Lives Matter and, players doing stuff in pregame warmups that's been going on for the better part of a decade right now, I thought the NBA would really, really be on the front end of the anti-Trump thing.
Well, initially they were, and I think that, Juan, you saw LeBron actively campaigning for Hillary Clinton. You saw him being, a number of players being incredibly verbal about what was going on, in terms of the presidency and the change and just what all of that said about where we were as a society. And, but what we've come to is that a lot of guys are like, there's not a whole lot more I can say. And they've moved on. But the guys who can say it and articulate about it and don't have fear of repercussion or blowback, you've seen, Steve Kerr's stayed on this topic. Greg Popovich has stayed on this topic. Some of it too is, reporters are going to ask the guys that'll answer it and give them something new and interesting to write about. Sometimes when you ask an athlete a question, you're going to get the same canned response 6 times. So, some of it's about, the thoughtfulness of the guy's answer. But I think with Greg Popovich, it becomes interesting because not only will he answer it, you can see it in his face about where his convictions are and what he believes in. And he's as thoughtful and intelligent and learned as anybody who speaks on these kind of topics. And I think that's why you hear his voice more on these things, because what he's saying just resonates in such a genuine way because of how he feels and what he knows and who he is and what he's accomplished in the sport.
He's an interesting guy, right? Like,
very much so.
5 years from now, he might run for president. I mean, literally, like
very much could. I don't think that's anything he has interest in. I think when he's done, you're going to hear about Popovich's vineyard. He loves red wine, and that's his thing. But I can tell you, Nestor, I've been one of those people who've been in a press conference who've had the fire hose pointed directly at my face and got it right in the eyes from Pop. You got to bring your A game with him. He's just not going to play the cliche thing. And, he's a very genuine guy. And, while he has some fun with the media, he's also very genuine in understanding all of it. The role everybody plays in all of this and how special a place the NBA has become, not only for players, but for coaches and for voices and for creativity and just all the things that make the NBA so much fun for so many people.
He is Steve Kyler. He's having fun this time of the year and watching basketball every night, but then spending days in Florida watching guys who may never play in the NBA but have a dream to play in the NBA. From the Maryland perspective on the Melo and the Jackson thing, and I think some of us were a little taken aback by the Jackson thing in Chicago last week, some thoughts about the timeline for these guys. And it is disappointing to be a college basketball fan. I think it's all part of it. I mean, it used to be something where if you were an old school college basketball fan, you knew you had 3-4 years with a guy and could get to know him. The whole industry's changed, and I think my level of interest has changed dramatically, as have a lot of people my age, with trying to figure out the Diamond Stones of the world who sort of stop by and pretend to be a student athlete for a few weeks and then go in to the NBA draft and don't even really care where they get drafted. They just want to go make money.
Well, there's more to it, too, in this part of it. The one and done, the idea being, try to get more time to understand who kids are and see who the real pros are and try to avoid a lot of things that the lifestyle of the NBA can get. But, the draft is about the future. It's not about immediate payoff. You saw it this year. No one that was drafted in the first round was even a consideration for Rookie of the Year this year. It's Malcolm Brogdon and Dario Saric are your two guys, and Malcolm was a second-round draft pick, one of the oldest kids in the draft, and Saric was drafted a couple of years ago. So, the draft is no longer instant gratification. It's 2 years out. But what you run into is, can you really improve? Can you get better? Can you become more if you stay? And a lot of these kids are understanding that, the college program, and this is something I think the NC2A has to look at, if you want kids to stay, you can't limit their access to coaches. You can't limit their ability to be, in the facility and train, because agents will pay them, to be a second-round draft pick and start that process earlier. And I think you saw it with Melo Trimble. He came back and didn't get better, and he may not get drafted. With Justin Jackson, it's kind of the same thing. If you go back, will you get better? Can you improve your ability, or will a team draft you now? And this year, more than any other year, the new collective bargaining agreement is going to give teams 2 more roster spots to use for D-League players, where there'll be two-way contracts, just like in hockey, where you can send kids down to the minors, you can bring them up to be with the home team. And then the financial part of that is if a team maximizes that, it's $300,000. So if you're Justin Jackson, you want to go back for another year with Maryland, or you want to go make $200,000, $300,000 in the D-League and really get a chance to get better. And a lot of these kids are choosing that option rather than going back and maybe being Melo Trimble, where you see your stock go from being a 40s level player to a 90s level player and being undrafted.
He is Steve Kyler. He's going to be watching basketball all week in person and on the telly as we get down to these Final Four teams. And you're on the Cleveland band. I want to make sure I script this because I'm going to call you back in a couple weeks.
Cleveland in 6.
Cleveland in 6, he says. We'll be following you out there at Basketball Insiders. You're also doing some tune-in radio, correct?
Yeah, the guys that tune in for a long time were just kind of where you found your favorite radio station. Now they're doing a lot of original programming specific to the NBA. They've got a nightly NBA show that our team is kind of part of. And there's good stuff coming. Basketball Insider show on TuneIn, maybe in the very near future.
Hey, looking forward to chatting with you again as we get up on the final, Steve. Stay in touch and enjoy all these combine get-togethers here in the heat of South Florida.
Anytime, my man.
You got it. Steve Kyler, NBA, the way to find him out on Twitter as well as at Basketball Insiders. We're going to be talking a little bit more basketball here in the Stanley Cup Finals as we get up on that, but a lot more baseball, a lot more Orioles here now that the Caps and the Wizards are out of this thing. We got some horse racing this week as well with the Preakness. We'll be checking in with some friends over at Old Hilltop, so we'll get some horse racing coverage here as well as some looks at mini camps and OTAs that are beginning to, we're almost at the end. I mean, a couple weeks from now, we'll turn the NFL off for about 6 weeks and get it going with training camp in August. But all Orioles all the time here as the Birds are in Detroit and then back home against the Toronto Blue Jays this weekend. You can find me out in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's all powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And last but never least, breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service on the mobile device. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday with the SSV beginning at 3 p.m. I'm out on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.